The most precious commodity in America right now is the ability to recognize truth even in a thunderstorm of falsity. This Trump thing is based on repeating lies until the populace is beaten into submission. You can say that they lie and all they say is, I didn't, or I don't care if I did.
Do you think this is fascism? Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy, and this is the podcast where we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest this week is a Booker Prize-winning author whose fiction probes power, morality, and the strangeness of contemporary America. In 2013, his commencement speech on the failures of kindness went viral online, a reflection on empathy that helped define his public voice. George Saunders has long explored how political and ethical forces shape ordinary lives. His new novel, Vigil, follows a dying oil executive forced to confront the real-world consequences of his life, blending satire with a stark look at climate and responsibility. George, welcome.
Nice to be here.
How would you change the world?
Oh, I wouldn't. It's fine. No, I actually, I had kind of two answers. One is I would start with my own mind, because I think that's really the main thing we can control, is to calm your own mind down and, in my case, get less monkey-minded and more patient. But in a more practical way, I would actually require that kids 10 years old or so start reading the Russian writers, Chekhov, Gogol, and Tolstoy especially. Those writers are so relatively simple to read, and they also open into so many interesting moral questions. And I think kids would love it. I talked to a couple that do mediation, so corporate, also personal mediation, and they said that when they get into really sticky cases where the two sides will not budge, they put a Chekhov story between them. And they said, we're taking a break. And they said that people tend to respond to those stories very emotionally. They offer up things about themselves they wouldn't otherwise have offered up, and in the end, that the parties often find a way to work through things because of Chekhov.
When did you discover Chekhov?
I read him when I was younger, didn't get it, just thought it was boring, and then I went to Syracuse University for writing school, and our teacher was Tobias Wolff, who's a master, and one night he read a Chekhov story called the About Love trilogy, and it was such a beautiful, he's a funny reader, got big laughs and moments of just where everybody was almost in tears, and I'd never heard Chekhov done that way, and the light went on that he actually is a great entertainer, and so that's when I kind of fell in love with.
Now the new book, Vigil, is back in the world of ghosts, angels, which of course Lincoln in the Bardo was hugely successful at. And I mean, maybe you should sort of set it up.
No, please, you can.
In terms of what it really is, because it's got some big themes.
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, it's basically a stinker dies, and the question of, can this guy who's done some really horrible things in the world, can he change at the last minute? Doesn't matter, since he's pretty much incapacitated. And then from there, it kind of opened into a lot of other side rooms I didn't see coming. But he's visited by one particular angel of a woman who died in 1976, and her approach is that he should be comforted. That he was just a particular human self. He couldn't help it. And then some other ghosts have a different idea, that he should be brought to task and made to repent. So it's kind of a big, grand cartoon is how I felt about it in the end.
Yeah, and the argument goes all the way through as to whether he needs to recognize his wrongness.
Or yes, and what could a person like that, can he be brought to recognize it, and if so, how? She thinks it's basically by gentleness, and another guy called the Frenchman says, no, people like this, you got to break them down, and then maybe once you've broken them down, they can come to truth on their own.
Now he is an environmental bad man.
Yeah,
that's the theme of his evil, and you, of course, began professional life as a geophysicist, working in mining.
Right.
So is this a world and you know people like him?
Yeah, I left it quite young because I wasn't very good at it and I got sick, but I knew the mindset, and I especially knew it for myself, because as a 22-year-old who'd never been out of the States, they sent me to Indonesia, to these beautiful virgin rainforests, and it was very kind of exciting and exotic, and you had the feeling that you were part of a tribe, of doers, basically. So I kind of drew on that very young experience of being kind of on fire about being an accomplished person and a traveling person. And he has a touch of that, but he's much better at it than I am because he becomes a CEO. Yeah.
But I mean, this is a very current morality tale.
Yes. Yeah.
Isn't it? Because I mean, you can extend it to all of us for everything. But even if we focus on the environmental evil, what is it you're trying to pick at?
Well, I mean, basically, this guy was based on some real life prototypes who, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, made it their business to consciously deny all the evidence that was already very dominant about climate change. So they taught the world a rhetoric of denial that, by the way, they picked up on from the tobacco industry. So they had a kind of, on the outside, they were committed to Enlightenment values and they were kind of good citizens, good family people. But underneath it, they were lying like crazy with a very specific objective that essentially, well, I would have said set us back 20 or 30 years, but the Trump administration is using that same rhetoric on stupid pills to completely deny climate change. So in a certain way, this guy in the book taught a language to a whole generation of people that are now, running rampant with it. So quite a sinner,
Yes, although he's sort of an old-fashioned sinner,
right?
Though, isn't he? And as you say, Trump has kind of jumped the shark.
Yeah, there was a beautiful.
He's gone beyond the sort of misleading people about the evidence.
Right.
He's just gone straight for this is a con.
Yes, there was a great piece. Ezra Klein and Masha Gessen talked about the sort of Bush era bad guy, which this person would always speak in Enlightenment values language. If caught in a lie, they were embarrassed and so on. But still, they were pretty nefarious. This Trump thing is, in my view, it's based on repeating lies until the populace is beaten into submission, which is a different energy. You can say that they lie, and all they say is "I didn't," or "I don't care if I did," and it's kind of like that ethos let off the chain in a certain way. That's a little frightening, because you can't actually. It's very hard to combat that with Enlightenment values. So, for example, satire kind of just hits them and drops off. Exposés doesn't seem to harm them, So they have said the only thing they respect is power, and I think that's true. But as we're seeing in Minneapolis, there's a different kind of power that they're not used to that can actually prevail over them if the parties stay peaceful and certain.
So do you think there is a separation now going on between the majority of people who are still governed by a sense of morality and a sense of right and wrong, and some people at the top who are wielding power really sort of in an amoral way?
I think, President Obama the other day said that it's a clown show being conducted on social media and in the media. So a very high elite clown show, performative clown show. My experience in the States is that most people, there's a shift to the right, but the basic decency is in place for now. And so there's a bit of a disconnect now between the kind of crazy things that are being said at the top and the people. And the country is kind of holding its breath to see which way it goes. For example, like the incredible cruelty of ICE. Even right-wing people are a little iffy about that. But the question is, will it be enough to stop this movement? And I think in Minneapolis, it seemed to. The stuff about Greenland, there was some kind of consensus among middle to right-wing middle politicians that got them to stop saying that. So I think it's experimental craziness, almost like hitting at the perimeter to see where it will break. And that's a frightening place to be. It's not stable at all.
What do you think the effect of that is, though? I mean, does it shift the Overton window, whatever you want to call it?
It certainly does. It does. Because, even in the States on the topic of immigration, a person, nobody in the States has ever lived in a country in which there were, not only were there no undocumented immigrants, but they were a substantial part of the culture and of the, suddenly now you hear, even from the center, the idea that, well, if they're here illegally. But I'm like that, you don't know at all what the country would be like without undocumented people, because they've done more than their share of the work for not enough money for a long time. And all of our wealth has been built on that. So it's a very naive, kind of incoherent worldview. But as you're saying, if you hear it often enough, if they bring you a plate of garbage 5 times in a row and tell you it's your meal, every time you start to think, well, maybe it's my meal. And I think that's where you get really a docile population. And the experiment that's being run is how many times do we have to lie to you before you forget that there's truth?
Do you think Trump and the people around him are susceptible to argument or reason or morality in the way that your character in the book is, ultimately?
I don't know because I've never talked to them, but I don't think so. I think there's a fundamentally, there's been a shift in, it's an election that they won by, say, 6.5 to 5.5. Okay, normally in that situation, you try to win over the 5.5. They just said we won it by 10 to 1, 10 to 0, and now we don't have to negotiate with anybody. So it's a belief in pure power that I don't think is particularly open to reasoning. But in situations like Minneapolis, where they can feel the opinion of the culture shifting, then they back off a little bit. So there is something there, but I don't think it's reason or argument. I think it's a very brute assessment of power.
It's also power that ultimately pushes them back.
I think so. And of course, what people are finding out is that the power that the people have is in community, actually. For one person to speak out is fine, but they can discard that. But when Minneapolis came together the way it did and almost miraculously didn't go over into violence, I don't think they knew what to do with that. So in the States, Minneapolis is becoming a kind of a buzzword for the way forward,
You also have had a sort of a political road to Damascus, personally. You were not just a Republican, but a pretty radical Republican as a young man.
I wouldn't go that far. I read Ayn Rand, and I think I voted for Reagan once. And if you talked to me at 19 or 20, I had fairly Reagan-esque beliefs, but I always had kind of a soft heart. So for me, I had this, I went to the School of Mines, which at that time was a very pro-oil kind of right-wing, not right-wing, but sort of center-right thing. And so I was outgunned in that school. I was a terrible student. So I found Ayn Rand, and she was the one who explained why I was special, And so I read that. And then I went to work in the oil fields, and I was in Singapore, possibly drinking a little bit, and walked by this hotel that they were building, and the foundation had been dug 2 stories deep. And I kind of sensed some movement down there, and I looked in, and there were about 200 or 300 elderly Malaysian, Singaporean, and Chinese Singaporean women clearing the rubble by hand at midnight, And something in me, I went, I'm a working class person, and I know people who have been similarly taken advantage of. And so that my political thing just shifted in like a minute.
It was a moment.
It really was. And I'd also been reading Steinbeck at that time, and The Grapes of Wrath. And so somehow I'd been thinking about it a certain way that made me comfortable. And in the light of that experience, everything shifted around, and I became a lifetime progressive.
And have you always wanted to be a writer whose fiction is essentially about big ideas?
Yes. My reading when I was young, in addition to Ayn Rand, was all the kind of Robert Pirsig, Khalil Gibran sort of, big idea, kind of maybe a little bit even new age kind of things. So I always thought, the purpose of fiction is to tell us what this world is about, or maybe even to tell us how we might live. And then when I found the Russians, that was really reinforced, that you could actually, by taking seriously an invented text, you could actually use that as a shortcut to truth, in a way that actually nonfiction does a beautiful thing in its own. But if you're talking about invented characters, you can sometimes skip past a lot of the surface confusion and get to the essence of it. So I've always had that. I would never want to be a writer if that wasn't part of the function. To change your own mind in the process of writing a piece is a wonderful experience.
Has that happened?
Oh, it has to happen. If it doesn't happen, you're not writing a book. What
did you change your mind about in Vigil?
Oh, everything. You go in thinking, I'm going to crucify the oil guy with a saintly angel. And then the saintly angel says, I don't want to be saintly, or I don't want to be too simply saintly. In fact, I want to be a little wrong. And the oil guy says, let me tell you about my childhood. So suddenly things start moving around. And the work actually is to show up every day and read it, see what the book is telling you, as opposed to what you were going to tell the book. And that's the thing that I love about it. So really, it's built into the editing process. You're reading something, and you notice that the book is not saying what you want it to say. And instead of correcting you say, all right,
Mm-hmm.
you tell me, and you react to the book in that way.
So how do you write them? Because I mean, I suppose, most writers know what they're going to write as they write it.
Yes.
They have a plan.
Right.
You're sounding like someone for whom the writing comes out and changes your mind.
Yeah. There's a beautiful Einstein quote. He said, "No worthy problem is ever solved on the plane of its original conception." So if I'm going to write book A and I do it, you're going to be bored by page 5 because you feel my intention already. Where we get into that kind of sacred space is when I'm a little confused and I'm working to find out what the book wants. The reader feels that uncertainty and feels the openness of it in a certain way. So for me, it's just been this kind of crazy OCD level rewriting, every day changing and putting it in, looking at the next day, and always with the mindset that I want to really track the energy that I think a reader will be feeling. And if it flags, don't panic. You can fix it by being very honest about what caused the drop in energy. So it's kind of a strange Zen, experience of just saying, I'm going to show up, read what I read yesterday, and see if it still holds up. And if not, trust that I can fix it by little movements. And that's the way the book tells you what it wants you to do. It's a strange, but it's a bit like a date. If you went on a date and you had index cards, offer a compliment at 6 p.m., that would be good in the sense that you'd have a lot of control over the experience, but it wouldn't be good for the person you're with because they would feel the condescension. So in the writing process, you're kind of trying to keep that openness, which means you have to really try to get rid of any agenda, whether it's plot or political. You really have to respect what the book is trying to tell you. So.
I mean, how important is it for the sinner to recognize their sin at the end of life?
Right. I don't know. But to me, there's a beautiful Tolstoy story called The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And in that book, this guy really is not that much of a sinner. He's just a conventional person. But his conventionality has kept him from having really authentic relationship with his family. So he gets to the end and he's got the physical pain of cancer, but he's also got a psychological pain because he suspects he's lived in the wrong way. But he can't bear to admit that. He's done everything correctly, he thinks. So for about 2 days, he's wrestling with God, like, wait a minute, why would you make me live the wrong way? I can't have lived the wrong way. Then on day 3, he says, all right, maybe I did, but I don't know how. And day 4, finally, he says, tell me, what did I do wrong? Because if I can at least, if I didn't live in the right way, it must be possible to have lived in the right way. And then he has a little tiny bit, but all of this happens when he's pretty much out of his mind with pain. He tries to ask his wife for forgiveness, and instead of forgive, he says, forgive. He doesn't quite get it out. So in reading that story, you're rooting for him so hard, to make, he's not going to change anything. He's out of commission forever, but his mind isn't. So I found myself rooting for him to make that change. So in this book, this character doesn't move the whole book, and he has 1 or 2 lines. But I felt that somehow in the large scale of the universe, if he comes to the realization he's done wrong, that's a slight check in the positive column. I felt. But I know people who read it said, I don't care. He's a sinner and he's going to hell. It doesn't. So I don't know. What do you think? Would it matter if at the very end of your life you could mentally correct an error? Would that?
Well, these things tend to only matter if you believe that there's something after life. and that either that may be reincarnation in the Hindu tradition, or it might be heaven and hell in a Judeo-Christian tradition, and that's why redemption traditionally matters.
Right.
But if there is no afterlife, then who cares?
But as a thought experiment, I'd say maybe, because I feel like let's say that you and I are on a trip together, and I say something that hurts your feelings, and in this experiment we're never going to see each other again. Okay, so we're going to part ways. Is it better if I say to you, I'm really sorry about that? I think it is.
You'll leave me feeling better at the end.
Yes, and me as well, because one of the sins that this guy has to deal with is intense denial. He's been denying bad things he's done forever, so there's kind of a crust of denial around him. So my thought was, well, if he could just break through for 1 minute at the end, that's, even if there's not an afterlife, that somehow I'm rooting for that.
Better for him.
Better for him. Yeah, it has no effect on anyone else, but better for him. But I'm not sure. Of course, I don't know. It's all speculation.
Do you believe in afterlife?
I'm a Buddhist, so I believe I believe in reincarnation because people who are better Buddhists than me have told me that it exists. And I believe that there's a mental phenomenon upon death that, and of course, as we know from dreams, it could be very long, But I guess what I really think is, if we want to know what happens at death, we just look at right now. How's your mind right now? At peace? Are you agitated, in denial? And then some of the Buddhist teachings say that at the end, after you've separated from this body, whatever your mind is gets supersized 10,000, 100,000 times. So that would argue for trying to cultivate peace of mind in every moment. But one thing that writing these books made me realize, I have no idea. I like.
There's something comforting about the idea of an angel coming down to comfort you as you pass through to whatever it is that you're passing through.
There's a wonderful book called, I think it's called Opening Heaven's Door by Patricia Pearson, and she is a science writer. And after her sister had a very intense kind of death-related experience, Pearson researched, and she said 50% of people who've been around the dying report extraordinary things, what we'd call supernatural. And one of them is a dying person will often have what appears to us to be a hallucination of a loved one coming to comfort them. Now, it looks from the outside like a hallucination, but from the inside, maybe not so much. And they sometimes, in one of the examples in the book, one of these visitors gave a fact to the dying person that wouldn't otherwise have been known. So it's a fascinating book to say, well, maybe, we walk around in this world with a very constricted perceptual apparatus, which is our brain and our senses. Obviously, it's not scale to the universe. So it could just be that those moments, some little wall falls away, But writing these books makes me realize I have no idea. I keep going back to that quote, I'm not afraid of dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens.
That's obviously two big books focused in this world between life and death. Are you personally obsessed by what happens at the end?
I'm concerned, but no, I only because it to me it seemed like it refracts back on this right now, So it's kind of like if we were at a beautiful party full of sensory experiences and great food and everything, and someone came up and said, "I'm going to throw you out of this party, but I can't tell you when." It kind of makes the party even more brilliant. But I don't feel particularly morbid about it. But I'm kind of interested in the way that the mind automatically normalizes everything. I get up in the morning, I'm writing my book because I'm a writer. Fine. But in fact, we are rushing toward the grave, and it's interesting that the mind, in a certain sense, protects us from that reality. But at times that protection is actually harmful, I think. If we really believe that this life that we're living in is real, that the self is real, that we're autonomous and that we're disconnected from everything else, that's kind of a terrible delusion to live under.
What do you think the challenge is then to activism and politics, if that's the world we're in?
Well, I think, again, Minneapolis shows that there is a way, and it has to do with, wonderfully, with human scale activity, community engagement. And I think where I come in as a fiction writer is to say the most precious commodity in America right now is the ability to recognize truth and continue to recognize truth even in a thunderstorm of falsity. And you can see that one of the ways that the fascist regime works is to just bombard with misinformation until the population goes quiet, goes docile, and then they've got you. So I think there are ways, and it's really kind of moving to watch. In the first months of the onslaught, it seemed unstoppable. They were moving so quickly and breaking laws, but now the judiciary system is starting to come together. Communities are starting to come together, and I think a lot of the people who didn't vote for Trump or did and are having some buyer's remorse are starting to take a little bit of notice. So I think, like in so many things, the change it's incremental. You wish you could say one thing and it would stop. Much more difficult than that.
But do you see any evidence that people who support Trump and ICE and the crackdown on immigration and the crackdown on undocumented migrants are changing their minds about what's right and what's wrong based on what's happened? Or is it just that at the moment there are still more people who think, I don't like this?
I think, and again, I'm not a particularly skillful political thing, but my firsthand experience is, first of all, the people that I know who voted for Trump have gotten very quiet in the last 4 months. That topic is avoided. And I think there were a lot of people who, I don't understand this, but they voted for Trump, and I think they actually would not have endorsed ISIS goon squad status. They certainly wouldn't have endorsed, taking Greenland or insulting Canada or insulting Europe. That group is really in play right now. People who voted for him in kind of a lazy, maybe slightly underinformed way, or in some sense that he was, I don't know, conventional. I don't know why they did actually, but those people I think have been a little bit left to hang out to dry, because I don't think anyone in that group anyway anticipated that ICE would become what it has become. I talked to a lot of Trump supporters before, and they said, "Oh, well, yeah, we should get the border under control." Sure. But I don't think they should have imagined by those tactics, but they didn't. So that's, I think, that's who I'm watching, is the people who didn't vote or who voted reluctantly, and to see when they reach the tipping point where they say we didn't sign up for this. But
and do you think this is fascism?
I don't really know the definition, but if it's not, I don't know. I mean, if you say, what would American fascism look like if not this? The only thing that's different is it's a funny thing. It's government by incoherence plus cruelty. And it's a kind of a novel combination. It's not they don't really have Trump, I don't think, has any kind of controlling philosophy except egotism. And the people around him are so wildly incompetent. And so they're a bit like wild animals jumping over a fence. You think, well, that fence is supposed to confine you. We didn't know when they go over. So I think it's in some ways difficult to fight, because they don't really buy into Enlightenment rules. They don't really care if you criticize them, and they're in kind of a power grab. They remind me a lot of someone who breaks into a house and they know they're going to be discovered, so they have to work quickly. But that's made a problem, because all the conventional American structures of critique are undone by this. You can satirize, they don't care. You can point out with a rational essay, they don't care. So it's very. They have said all they care about is power, and now in fact they've converted the system to work by those same rules: power or nothing.
I mean, it's interesting that there is still a discomfort to call it fascism, isn't there? I mean, you talked about fascism initially, which is why. So do you think this is fascism?
I use it only because I don't know the history of fascism as well as I could. I also think sometimes calling it that, it's not useful, because it is that plus something else, and it's the something else that's making it elude resistance in some ways. So if they were, I had a friend one time who said, when the fascists come back, they won't be wearing the jackboots. And I think there's something in there. So to me, I think it is fascism, but it isn't 1930s fascism. It's got some new twist on it. And if we treat it as 1930s fascism, the solutions will be outdated. They're doing something new that no one's quite. I mean, the truest thing that an American could say is, I don't know what's happening, because for all the punditry and the satire, I don't think people really understand it yet. Frighteningly,
I mean, you've spoken a lot about the importance of human contact and kindness. Do you think ultimately the thing that has made people go stop in Minneapolis is this blunt, obvious nature of the cruelty?
Yeah. I mean, we saw murders on TV, and they said it wasn't a murder, and so then anybody is going to start to,
I mean, what do you think has happened to kindness in America?
Well, the thing is, kindness. I mean, I made the speech years ago, and I became the kindness guy, which is a great liability. But you can't rob banks anymore. But I think kindness, especially in the Eastern tradition, they take it very seriously. But they also look at it to see what its component parts are. So in America, sometimes the confusion, kindness and niceness are the same. And in the Eastern traditions, compassion is not always nice, but it is involved with benefiting a given situation. So if you have to be harsh, you're harsh. And if the situation is transformed positively, you've been kind. So in America, on the superficial level, you go to an airport, people are still very kind. And I think their core values are about kindness. But in this situation, when you have ICE, disrupting families and murdering people, kindness is not a soft voice. It's a peaceful community effort like Minneapolis. So kindness is just sometimes you could say kindness is what prevents a person from doing harm. I heard a great Buddhist teaching by Francesca Fremantle, and she was talking about this question. And she said, if whatever epistemology you believe in, these people are in a world of hurt right now. The Trump and Stephen Miller, they've done so much harm. 300,000 or 400,000 people dead because USAID was canceled. And she said very sweetly, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy to have done that kind of harm. So for someone like me, that the kindest thing you could do, protect the victims, but get Trump et al. To stop somehow, to neutralize their power so they can't act with such impunity. It's all kind of the same package of trying to reduce the total harm.
But you don't think the people or the level of kindness in America has fundamentally changed? You don't think that has to have happened to allow this?
Well, again, kindness, how do we define it? And by definition, if you can elect somebody like him twice, there's something about, I would, if I was going to really answer the question, I'd focus on the extent to which we will tolerate cruelty. So it started early in his speeches, and he was so derogatory to certain groups of people, and there wasn't a great outcry about that, that was when my antenna went up, is that he could say these really harsh things about disabled people or Mexican Americans, and the country didn't just toss him aside. So I think there's something going on, and I'm not knowledgeable enough to say, but on the surface, it's a fairly high functioning country yet, but obviously something has to have moved right in some way. But I'm not really sure. Have you been there recently?
No, not for a while.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to get your perspective, because I'm a bit like the fish in the water. I can't really tell.
It so depends where you go as well, obviously.
Yes.
Because America's not one country.
No, and this is all part of what the strategy. They hit Minneapolis, they hit Chicago, they hit L.A., and I was in L.A. when and it was like you had to go to that neighborhood, and then you'd see the situation. But 3 miles away is nothing. So I think they're testing the perimeter walls a little bit with these incursions to see what will happen. And in Minneapolis, they got driven back. So
if the Frenchman Angel in Vigil were to come to Donald Trump's deathbed,
oh boy,
how would you write him?
Well, the ethos would be the same, which is you're not going to soft talk your way into changing this guy. You have to hit him straight on with the truth. I think he would be rebuked. I don't think he'd have much luck. But the Frenchman is just saying, this guy has built up a shell of dishonesty over his whole life. You can't massage him out of that. You have to strike. You have to really tell him the truth that he can't deny. But it doesn't work in this case, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure when it works.
I mean, because it comes to sort of why you think it is better for him to recognize the wrong. I mean, the thing about Trump is he doesn't apologize for anything.
Nothing.
And you feel as though an apology would almost break him.
Yeah. Which is interesting. You think that a grown man with so much power and so much good fortune, his Achilles heel is admitting he's wrong even once with sincerity. That's an incredible. And this is the puzzle for me is, I've known a lot of people in America, high, low, middle, everywhere, and for the most part, I haven't met too many actual people who have that quality of never apologizing, because most normal people, you can't go through your life with that kind of rigidity. But Trump has been rich and famous his entire adult life. So it's really a deep irony that this guy who has really never set foot in a normal American street in a normal way was mistaken as a man of the people. That's a joke I'll never like.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, so most.
So what I mean is sort of rather than being a net good for him to admit what he's done, might he not die screaming?
I don't. I have something in me doesn't want anyone to die screaming. Not even nobody. I don't know why. Only because in that case the attitude remains unchanged, and that seems tragic to me. So if even somebody who was my worst enemy got to the end and had a realization, I think I would be for that. But that's me. That's just my maybe my weakness. But I don't see any benefit in my worst enemy continuing to do that for which I hate him. That doesn't. But
can I ask you? I mean, you're sort of, I suppose, relatively late in your career. You've become lionized.
Yeah.
You have all these accolades, amazing awards, not just the Booker, but what difference does it make?
It actually, to be honest, what it does is it placates that part of me that wanted that when I was young. And it actually does sort of satiate that, all right, that was, and then you think what's left, and then your mind goes to the work, which is really nice. So I think when I was young, you always have that feeling of, will I make a dent? Will my work be recognized? And when it has been probably over-recognized, overpraised, then you think, okay, so that hunger is done. What other hunger do I have? And in the last 10 years, especially since Lincoln, I'm like, oh, I really want to write a great book. And I want to get my view of the world in a book. And I may not be able to do it because time is short and it's difficult. But it's been sort of a kind of a purifying relief to say, all that attention you wanted, you got it. So, and it even becomes a bit distracting. You'd rather just be working quietly. So it's actually been kind of nice to have the need, recognize the need, placate the need, and then say, okay, what else is there to do, which is more virtuous than trying to.
Is it hard to live up to?
I don't really try.
Once you've won these things.
I kind of have a very, my first book came out when I was 38, and I kind of said to myself, don't mess around. You got to get going. So I have a kind of a habit of mind that if something starts to mess with me, I just say, get thee behind me. So if I start thinking, oh, this book won't be as good as the previous, I'm like, it might not. But if you don't write it, it won't be anything. So just kind of, it's the one part of my life when I'm not neurotic. I want to be productive, and I want to give my talent, which I see is kind of separate from myself. I want to give it a chance to get in there and do something. So it doesn't bother me that much, actually. It's not. It would be. I work with students, and it's very, very talented students, and sometimes a student will show up with so much talent and such a, but they have a mental sticking point, and they can't go past a certain. In other words, they're a bit allergic to success, and it's very sad to see that, because it's not that they're not talented; they're very talented, but they don't have the talent for having talent. And when you see that, it's quite tragic. This young person who wants to do this thing could do it, but for one sort of mental construct. So I don't want to be that person. I want to just push through and do my best work and not be, neurotic about it.
And what do you say to your students about their futures in a world in which AI is surprisingly good at the things we kind of didn't think it'd be very good at, the creative stuff?
It's not that good at writing.
Maybe not yet.
Yeah, no. Yeah. My argument, you will never be a creative writer because it's not a person, and it will never be a person. And the day that it can go out and smell the fresh cut grass with a heart that's just been broken, then it can talk to me. And not the day when it's taking someone else's version of that and regurgitating it. So I'm not, and I know in science and math it's very powerful, but in writing it's almost de facto. It can't do the job. Now the problem is people could forget how to read well, and they would mistake AI writing for actual creativity. But I don't think so.
What do you mean by forgetting how to read well?
Well, I think it's like music. If you were constantly hearing music, and Mozart came on, you might go, what's that garbage? So I think if the market gets inundated with AI writing, that fine sense of discrimination that a good reader has might get watered down, and then it wouldn't make any difference, But I think, basically, if I'm reading Toni Morrison, I want to know the person who grew up in Ohio, and all of her history of reading is in there, her history of living, her history of loving, and that's a human. I want another human. And then the magic is she can make up a story, and this person very different from me can get in here and kill me, with the beauty. I don't think that involves a computer or involves machines. It only involves two human beings rising to that occasion. So I don't think it's really a problem. But what I tell my students is that we're pretty frank with them. I have a session where I say, here's how much I make for my books. Here's how much goes to taxes. We really, it's quite ugly. And the point of that is don't do it for a livelihood, because increasingly it doesn't give a livelihood, but do it because you love it and make your life around it so that you protect it no matter what. So it's quite moving to talk to these people who love language and love books and say, are you willing to do this even if you have a day job the whole rest of your life? What is it about this that is important to you? And then we have a really last minute conversation where I say, go off this weekend, have just some quiet time with yourself and ask, what do I need to keep producing? What would my life have to look like? And it might be that you need 8 hours a day. Maybe you can get by with 1. Maybe you can teach, maybe you can't. But have that really frank conversation, because the culture doesn't really want you to be a writer. We kind of prefer that you didn't. So it's a bit of a warrior code, like let's gird up our loins and make a life of art. And with all the pressures that capitalism puts on us, let's still protect the flame.
And so why do you keep writing? What is it you get from the writing? Because you probably don't need to do it anymore. For me, honestly, it's the moment when this guy vanishes, the guy with the middle-aged or maybe late middle-aged opinions, who knows everything and is kind of a mansplainer. He vanishes, and there's something wiser that comes. And for me, it comes through revising work. So every revision gets a little sharper, a little smarter, a little funnier, and importantly, a little more mindful that there's a reader on the other end. And that, to be in that state for a couple hours a day is really beautiful. It's almost like a refresh. Whatever habits you've built up in your life, defensive habits or just habits, in that realm of creating a piece of art, for a minute, that all drops away. And you're 18 again, or maybe you're timeless or something. And so that's really what I've come to love. And I couldn't live without that. That's just, it's almost like, it's a little corny to say, but you are kind of in touch with something outside of yourself that's quite transcendent. Nothing big or mystical, but just this draft has wisdom in it that draft didn't, or this draft has a joke in it that wasn't there before. That's something that I think I'll never get tired of, no matter how much money they give me. George Saunders, thank you very much.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your ways to change the world. You can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Until next time, bye-bye.